Last week we ended with, after we did the ancient philosophers, with the teachers from ancient China, ancient India, ancient Egypt, on up through the Middle Ages, we ended with Emanuel Swedenborg in 1688. And he was kind of a turning point because his is the only writing that has resulted in an organization that is still going. The Swedenborgian churches still exist, although he didn't found them. The churches were founded by his followers after his passing. So the next person that pops up in history, and you've heard of this guy, Franz Anton Mesmer, who was a Frenchman, and he had a healing method that actually was hypnosis. He didn't call it hypnosis. He didn't understand it. He was healing people by putting them into a trance, but he thought that the trance facilitated the flow of animal magnetism. He had no idea what he was doing, but it worked. And so it was the beginning of this idea of a mind cure. Then Phineas Parkhurst Quimby in the United States. Now we're up to the 1800s. He was born in 1802, so now we're in the 1800s. He taught and practiced that error belief was the cause of disease and truth was the cure. Quimby was a watch and clock maker, but he had a scientific, analytical mind, and he is credited by most as being the father of New Thought. In 1836, Quimby was introduced to mesmerism, and after working with it for several years, he eventually developed the theory that the cause of disease is an erroneous belief. If a person is deceived into belief that he has or is liable to have a disease, the belief is catching and the effect follows it. The cure for the erroneous belief that caused disease is the truth. So Quimby really worked himself to death. He was so good at healing and he was so devoted to it. And people would just come, and sometimes he would do it in an open area like a yard, and he would just have two chairs, and the person would come and sit in the chair, and he would sit next to them, and he would listen to them talk about what they were experiencing, what illness they had, and he would just talk them out of it. He would just make them understand the truth. There's no disease except in your mind. If you change your mind, I think maybe he was actually hypnotizing them and didn't realize it. I don't know. But he had no biblical or spiritual aspect to his belief or his practice. He just thought that plain and simple, just scientifically, if you can explain to people that disease is caused by the mind, then you can talk them out of their sickness. And he did it over and over again. At about the same time, a great philosopher came into being, Ralph Waldo Emerson. He was born in 1803. He's important for the study of metaphysical religion and New Thought because his writings inspired the principal founders of the New Thought denominations. One historian wrote that Charles Fillmore read Emerson endlessly because all the wisdom of the antecedents of New Thought were channeled in some way through him. Emerson was strongly influenced by Plato, whom he studied in depth. Emerson strove to rely on the inner process of intuition for the source of truth, rather than the rationalism of the Enlightenment. Remember, America is a child of the Enlightenment, and Emerson was the first great American philosopher. He taught that we should rely on our own minds as informed by our senses, not on the teaching of church or state. And he went one step further. Rely on intuition to guide you in your choice of spiritual teachings and in everything else. This was startling to his audiences. He was a famous lecturer, and when he made this pronouncement that we should rely on our own inner knowing and not on religious authority, which means not on the church, not on the Bible, not on the Pope or any spiritual leader, but on your own inner knowing. People would get up and walk out of his lectures because this was so heretical. 3 of his important ideas include the world as a grand, benevolent paradise. At one point in his life, he was invited to visit France. He didn't want to go to France, but for some reason he went. I guess somebody gave him the passage for free or something, I don't know what. And he went to a famous garden, which I believe is kind of like a botanical garden. But the theme of this beautiful garden was the interconnection and interdependence of plant and animal life. We're very accustomed to thinking in these terms, but in his day, this was a new way to look at and experience nature. You know, now we talk about ecosystems, and we know that if you subtract even one element from a thriving system, you can throw out of whack the whole system. You know, it's like if you kill all the wolves, you know, that doesn't solve your problem. That just puts things out of balance. You have to have, I guess you don't have to have a certain amount of alligators, but we keep raising them so we can have alligator tail in restaurants, I guess. But this idea that you can't take one element out of a system without disturbing the system gave him this idea that the universe is a benevolent paradise, that they were all part of one huge ecosystem. And you know, when I was in 3rd grade or 4th grade, right around there, I remember I can still see the pictures explaining that the trees and the plants give out oxygen and we breathe in the oxygen. Then we give off carbon dioxide and the trees and the plants absorb the carbon dioxide. You know, that it's a system. So we grew up with this idea, but this was new to them. And so really, Emerson was the first of the long line of tree huggers, the people who really love nature, who see it as a source of spiritual food, just to be in nature and to be in harmony with nature. Okay, the second thing was man as a free thinker. We had suffered for, at this point, almost 2,000 years of being told that we were defective from the factory, that we are all born in sin, that we are all evil, and therefore you can't trust your mind. But Emerson insisted, yes, you can, and you must let the heart lead the head. And freedom is achieved by the willingness to reject old concepts and explore for oneself the veracity of all claims. It's been said that Emerson's teachings inspired new thoughts and systems on pure individual discovery of truth, free from revealed religion and doctrinal theology. And the third great teaching that is finally now catching on, I think, is the divinity of man, that we are God an expression. The first time I ran into this, I was shocked by it, because I had a very traditional religious upbringing, first as a Protestant and then as a Catholic. But the idea that we are each one, that we can behold the Christ in each other and in ourselves, is one of the startling, revolutionary ideas. Now, Emerson was not alone in his thinking. You all know that he was great friends with Thoreau and Coleridge and others. And they had like a club, and they would go off a couple weeks at a time and spend time in the wilderness together, or I guess semi-wilderness. I don't know how wildernessy it was, but it seemed like wilderness to them. And the club started a philosophy called transcendentalism. But transcendentalism did not become a school or a church, but the teachings of transcendentalism that were taught by Emerson and his other pals have greatly influenced the United States and now the world. Transcendentalism teaches that God is already present in everything, and therefore everything is a miracle, just as we sang in that beautiful song. And I just want to point out, when you hear or when you sing that song, you can tell that whoever wrote that song was speaking from his own heart. He was not explaining transcendentalism to you. He was expressing his inner experience of the presence of God, the Holy One, in everything. And this is what transcendentalism teaches. That if anybody wants to know what transcendentalism teaches, just tell them to listen to that song, because everything is in it. Okay, the next person that we're going to talk about is an Englishman who was a judge in India at the time that India was still a part of the British Empire. And his hobby was comparative religion. So he studied the Hindu religions. He studied Buddhism. And then when he retired from his judgeship, he came back to England, and he began giving lectures. And the writings of Thomas Troward are the beginnings of the European acceptance of these ideas that we now today know as New Thought. And for me, now this may not be for all of you, but for me, he's not easy reading. But I have some great quotes from him. Here's the first one. The soul requires no progress. It is. Now, I've told you over and over that your soul does not grow. You need to discover what is within you, not grow. Then he said, belief in limitation is the one and only thing that causes limitation. Wow. Not a wishy-washy statement. We can gradually grow into any condition we desire, provided we first make ourselves in habitual mental attitude the person who corresponds to those conditions. So this is affirmation one step further. Not only do I affirm that I am healed and whole, I must constantly think of myself as a healed and whole person. And if any thought other than that sinks in, we dismiss it and go back to this image of ourselves as a healed and whole person. And finally, I like this one. The law of flotation was not discovered by contemplating the sinking of things, but by contemplating the floating of things, which floated naturally, and then intelligently asking why they did so. So again, we don't think of the negative. We don't, even when we make our affirmations, we always make them positive. We don't say, I don't smoke anymore, or I will never smoke again. We say, I am a non-smoker. Everything is in the affirmative. Okay, moving on to Warren Felt Evans. Warren Felt Evans, born in 1817, wrote the first New Thought book. And he started as a Methodist minister. He was a Methodist minister for 25 years, and then he converted to Swedenborgianism and became a healer. He visited Quimby and combined Quimby's methodology with the Swedenborgian philosophies and with that faith. His method was a mental process of changing the patient's way of thinking about disease. So his contribution was that he was a good writer, and his writing was very well received throughout the world. And then we come to Mary Baker Eddy. Mary Baker Eddy is a turning point in the New Thought history, because up to this point, no one had established an organization based on New Thought teachings, which is what she did. She started out life as a Calvinist, but as a child, even though she was raised in Calvinism, she rejected predestination, and sort of that was the beginning of her kind of going on her own way spiritually by reading the Bible on her own. But she got, in her midlife, she got very sick, and she heard about Phineas Parkhurst Quimby, and she went to him, and he treated her for several days over a period of time. But she was cured by his method. So she became his secretary, and she learned his methods. Then he died. 1 month after his death, she was in an accident and seriously hurt her back. And now she didn't have Quimby to heal her. So she asked for her Bible, and when she was reading in her Bible about Jesus healing people, she was healed. And she says, that's the day that Christian Science was born. So she was the first to establish a lasting organization. She started the Church of Christ Scientist, based on a book that she wrote explaining how the mind cure was expressed from the Bible. She felt that she was like a prophet, and the book she wrote, what's the name of her book? Science and Health. The book she wrote, Science and Health, is she believed was the last word. This was a revelation, and she would not allow any deviation from it. She also, not only did she start a school and a church, she also started a newspaper called the Christian Science Monitor, which of course is still with us. And one of the first editors of the Christian Science Monitor was another turning point in the New Thought movement, Emma Curtis Hopkins. Emma Curtis Hopkins was very well educated in New Thought, and she studied for herself. Well, I guess I should just tell you in order. I don't know how long she was the editor of the Christian Science Journal, but Eddie fired her in 1885 because Eddie found out that she was reading other metaphysical books besides her writings. So Emma Curtis Hopkins left and became her own teacher in her own school. And what she was basing her beliefs on, she studied personally Plato, Plotinus, Spinoza, Augustine of Hippo, Ralph Waldo Emerson, the Buddha, Thomas Carlyle, he's one of the transcendentalists, and the teachings of Zoroastrianism. I thought that was very interesting. So it's very important to see the difference between these two philosophies, that Mary Baker Eddy said, this is it, this is what we teach and nothing else. And Christian Science churches to today still follow that. The Sunday lesson that they give is not created by whoever their minister is. From the Mother House in Boston, the scripture reading and the reading from Science and Health is dictated every week, and the minister just reads it because Eddie insisted it's my way or the highway. But we grow. We are, one time, Charles Fillmore was giving a lecture, and someone said, Mr. Fillmore, I read your book on this topic, and that's not what you said in your book. And he said, you're correct. I've changed my mind. So we can change our minds. We're open. So Emma Curtis Hopkins, in her school, which did not survive, we no longer have an Emma Curtis Hopkins school, but her students became the founders of organizations. And they included the Fillmores, Ernest Holmes, the founder of Science of Mind, and H. Emily Cady, who wrote Lessons in Truth. Hopkins is responsible for abandoning the term Christian Science. When New Thought became popular, it wasn't called New Thought, it was called Christian Science. Eddie's organization is still called Christian Science. So everybody was Christian Science, and there were there was discord because everybody didn't teach the same thing. So Emma Curtis Hopkins said, well, I'm not going to call myself Christian Science. I'm going to call my publication Universal Truth, and I'm going to call my students Truth Students, which we still are today. So that brings us, I'm not going to go into the Fillmores. We'll do another Sunday on the Fillmores. But they were her students, and they started the Unity movement. Ernest Holmes started the Science of Mind movement, and which we still have, but it's now called the Centers for Spiritual Living. And then we come to Emmett Fox. Emmett Fox was not a student of Emma Curtis Hopkins, but he was a student of one of her students who founded a church called Divine Science, which there are still Divine Science churches, but they're mostly out west. But they're New Thought churches. But he was just so gifted. He was a wonderful speaker and a wonderful writer. He was a Divine Science minister because he was so popular that whoever was in charge of Divine Science at the time said, if you will become a member of Divine Science, we will ordain you. He would have become a Unity minister, but he wouldn't go to ministerial school. But Divine Science said, you don't have to go to our ministerial school, we'll just ordain you. But the Fillmores wouldn't do that. But everybody loves, and his books, his best known books is On the Lord's Prayer. But he wrote a lot of books, and it's very easy reading. He's very inspirational, and you can't go wrong with Emmett Fox. As a little side note, you may love Emmett Fox and not know this about him. His secretary was the mother of one of the men who worked in the founding of AA, a co-worker with Bill W. And as a result of that connection, AA groups were frequently inviting Fox to speak to them. And it was his simplicity and power and the basic principles of his book, The Sermon on the Mount, that drew alcoholics to Fox. His teachings on love, forgiveness, God as the only power, that evil is insubstantial, living one day at a time, the trap of resentments, and the correspondence between thought and the kind of life we have, all contributed to an AA philosophy that has transformed the lives of literally millions of recovering alcoholics. So I didn't know that. I don't know if you Fox fans knew that. So before we close out on this aspect of history, I just want to say a couple of words about transcendentalism. Of course, in the period of the Enlightenment, people turned away from the teachings of the church, and to the extent that their senses said what the churches were teaching weren't true. You know, that the earth was not flat, that the earth was not the center of the universe, things like that. Oh, come on now. It's not going. But when you combine the physical with the spiritual, what happens? You get a miracle, right? I've said that to you many times. The spiritual combined with the physical will result in a miracle. But transcendentalism actually goes one step further than that and says, everything's a miracle. That because there is no separation between physical and spiritual, that everything is actually, God is all there is, which is why we teach go within or go without. Now, this doesn't mean that you don't have teachers, but you choose the teachers that speak to your heart. I've always said, well, not always. Since I left the Catholic Church, I have said, I am the Pope of my religion. And we all are. I think even the people who slavishly follow some prophet or some teaching, they chose that. They actually chose that. They may say, no, I'm submitting my will to what's in the Bible or to the prophet or whatever. But they made that choice. So I think everybody's the Pope of their own religion, whether they are willing to realize it or not. So when, the number one affirmation that we all have learned, it's like the theme of unity. There is only one power and one presence in the universe and in my life, God, the good, omnipotent. That's pure transcendentalism. And oops. And I didn't make a slide for it. But we all know it. I'll say it again. There is only one power and one presence in the universe and in my life, God, the good, omnipotent. Let's end with that together. There is only one power and one presence in the universe and in my life, God, the good, omnipotent. Amen. So be it, and so it is.